Okay. Thanks, Alan, for that guidance. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Well, as you have already figured out, essentially doubling the flow-through allocations for IDEA between one year and the next creates both opportunity and challenge. The opportunity, of course, is for improving the foundations or infrastructure of our special education programs in areas such as professional development and mentoring, using both technology and assistive technology in the instructional process, facilitating response to intervention in the areas of reading, math, positive behavioral supports, and providing post-school transition services. The challenge is, of course, to be able to strategically implement these structural changes within a relatively short period of time and maintaining the requirements of the excess cost supplemental funding associated with it. I'm confident that we can create enhanced opportunities with the additional ARRA monies. We have already reviewed and approved over 200 applications for ARRA special education funds. These applications are indicative of thoughtful and intuitive approaches to improving special ed and related services in our state. We've also had many thoughtful discussions with business managers and program staff that are reflected in the budget planning process. And I'm confident that we can maintain the fiscal integrity of our system when we understand the conditions upon which the additional formula grant funding is provided. The first one is that IDEA ARRA funds are intended to stimulate improvements in the provision of special ed services for 2009-10 and beyond. IDEA ARRA grants, formula grants, were not intended as a bailout for funding inequities that may have existed prior to 2008-9. Even the maintenance of effort flexibility option of reducing expenditures by not more than 50% of the increase in federal funds from 2008-9 to 2009-10 is intended to mitigate future state and local obligations, not to reduce expenditure obligations prior to that point in time. And as Bob indicated earlier, we have removed any carryover limitations on the IDEA ARRA funding for 2009-10. This should help to spread the full effect of the enhanced funding from 2009-10 and beyond. The second principle is IDEA ARRA funds are intended to go away. Becoming reliant on this source of funding for core services can create a potential pothole that could require even more local effort to be contributed over time if we're not careful about how we do this. This is what is meant by avoiding the funding cliff. IDEA ARRA formula grant funds should be invested in ways that do not result in unsustainable continuing commitments after the funding expires. IDEA ARRA funds are intended to improve student achievement and outcomes. A fundamental question I think we should always ask ourselves in determining how to appropriately spend these funds is, to what extent is this expenditure intended to improve the potential of increased student outcomes? IDEA ARRA funds are being subjected to, word of the day, unprecedented level of reporting and are subject to an unprecedented level of public scrutiny. This is why we are admittedly cautious in our guidance and approach relative to this funding. None of the existing IDEA regulations were suspended or repealed as a result of this additional funding. Quite frankly, the risk associated with overly liberal or unfounded interpretations on more than $200 million in a formula grant supplemental increase in the context of impending revenue shortfalls at both the state and local level is simply too large to ignore. Just as a reminder to everyone, there are two fundamental concepts in federal financial support for special education. One is the concept of excess cost. Excess cost means those costs that are in addition to or in excess of the annual average per pupil expenditure for a non-eligible elementary or secondary student. OSPI has provided templates in this regard for your use, and each district has already provided us with an excess cost calculation. These templates are intended to assist districts in applying the excess cost concept to their budget process. and we hope that you have found this information to be helpful. The second cornerstone of federal financial support for special education is the concept of supplant, non-supplant. In other words, federal support for special education through IDEA, and in this case, the IDEA portion of ARRA, is intended to supplement and not supplant state, local, or other funds. As you are well aware, the way in which the supplant, non-supplant is determined is through the maintenance of effort calculation process that is based on the prior year. Remember, maintenance of effort is an expenditure test for the prior year state and local fund sources on an aggregate or per capita basis. OSPI has provided detailed longitudinal maintenance of effort templates for use by districts. These templates are intended to assist districts in assessing their ongoing obligation in the context of maintenance of effort over time. We hope this information has been helpful to you and that you will continue to utilize these templates. Most of you, I think, are pretty familiar with this. We've had a lot of access to these, and I hope that's been helpful, and it's the kind of thing you'll continue to use over time. They're not intended to be one-time opportunities. But working knowledge of the concepts of both the excess cost and the supplant, non-supplant provisions through the maintenance of effort calculations, I think can serve as the guidepost and parameters for safely navigating the fiscal issues associated with the IDEA portion of the ARRA funding. For example, you might find it helpful to always ask yourselves in allocating IDEA, ARRA funds, two fundamental questions. One is this allocation indicative of an excess cost? And two, can this allocation be justified in the context of the supplant, non-supplant provisions of IDEA? As you are all very much aware, there are lots of moving parts associated with this. We need to be careful in our applications of the various moving parts so that we don't inadvertently create, exacerbate, or simply overlook the very problem we may be trying to solve because we didn't line up all the pieces to begin with. Probably the best analogy that works for me is trying to play chess on 3 different levels at the same time. So when you move a piece here, you have to realize that it moves a piece on the bottom as well. And all of these things sort of interconnect in a way. It isn't that we can't do it. We just need to be thoughtful about this in a way in which we can make it work. We've provided you all the guidance that we have received from the Office of Special Education Programs since the 1st of April. April 1st, April 13th, July 1st, and again, the most recent use of funds. As you're aware, this guidance has become more and more and more specific as it has been issued. As I think states begin to realize and start to apply the money, the guidance simply becomes more narrow to some extent, and I think is actually going to be helpful to us. We expect there will be lots of revisions in the process. We anticipate that. We'd love to be able to staff up to do that, Alan, but we're on the same sort of system everybody else is. We look forward to working with you over the next day and a half now. We realize that you have very significant and unique questions that apply to your own situations that we can't always deal with in a general situation, but we're going to try to deal with those as much as we can through the next day and a half. We also have a session on coordinated early intervening services, or CEIS, as it relates to response to intervention right after this session, and I think there's some unique pieces associated with that. My advice to you is be careful, be very careful. I've said that I think consistently since about February when this first started to come out. And it's because of the nature of the different moving parts. It is something we can figure out. Someone said earlier, it may not be rocket science, but it feels like rocket science. I don't think it's rocket science, but it sure feels like nuclear physics to me. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gail Pauley, and Gail is going to walk you through some Title I issues as well.